Everybody, welcome to Creative Conversations Digital, FotoFest digital program to connect you with our programs of speakers, artists, historians, curators, critics that are in dialogue and telling you about the important work that they're doing. And we're really pleased that you're here with us tonight. I'm Stephen Evans, I'm FotoFest Executive Director. And I welcome everyone. Tonight, we're going to have Eric Gyamfi in conversation with Oluremi C. Onabanjo, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As we begin, I just want to thank our major institutional and individual supporters, which include the Brown Foundation, Inc., the Houston Endowment, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Texas Commission on the Arts, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation, the Powell Foundation, the Wortham Foundation, the WWW Foundation, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, Judith and Gamble Baldwin, Wendy Watrous and Frederick Baldwin, Katie and Michael A. Casey, David and Martha Moore, Nina and Michael Zilka, the FotoFest Board of Directors, Silver Street Studios, and Island Cloud Services. We're really thankful to all of those supporters. They sustain our programs. And Eric was an artist showing at FotoFest during the most recent biennial 2020 in the exhibition African Cosmologies, Photography, Time, and the Other, but also in our recent public art exhibition, Public Life. And Public Life has been funded by the Brown Foundation, Inc., the Houston Endowment, the National Endowment for the Arts, the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance, the Wortham Foundation, Silver Street Studios, Sawyer Yards, Papa's Restaurants, Lovett Commercial, and donors to the FotoFest Annual Fund. But the project would not have been possible without the major funding of the Texas Commission on the Arts and their Cultural District program. So we're really grateful for all of that. Without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers this evening. Eric Gyamfi obtained a BA in Economics and Information Studies at the University of Ghana in 2014. He is currently pursuing an MFA at the Department of Painting and Sculpture of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Gyamfi was a fellow at the Photographers Masterclass in Khartoum, Sudan in 2016, in Nairobi, Kenya in 2017, and in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2018. He was also an invited participant in the Nuku Studio Photography Workshops in 2016 and in the World Press Photo West African Masterclass in 2017, and is a recipient of the 2016 Magnum Foundation Fund. Gyamfi lives and works in Accra, Ghana, where he is a member of the Nuku Studio, a collective of visual storytellers dedicated to reporting on issues around Africa and beyond. He is a winner of the 13th Foam Paul Huff Award, which is given annually by an international jury to talented photographers under the age of 35. Eric Gyamfi, Fixing Shadows, opened at Foam in Amsterdam in December 2019. Oluremi C. Onabanjo is a curator and scholar of photography and the arts of Africa. A member of the curatorial team of the Hamburg Triennial of Photography in 2022. She lectures internationally on photography and curatorial practice, and in 2019 was a visiting critic in the Department of Fine Arts at UPenn. The former director of exhibitions for the Walter Collection, Onabanjo has curated and co-organized exhibitions in Africa, Europe, and North America. In 2017, she co-curated Recent Histories, Contemporary African Photography, and edited its accompanying publication, which was published by Steidl, and was shortlisted for an ICP Infinity Award in Critical Writing and Research, and named one of the best photo books of 2017 by the New York Times. Onabanjo's writing has been published by Aperture, Autograph ABP, the Museum of Modern Art, the New Yorker, the Photo Book Review, the RISD Museum's Manual, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Tate, etc., and Steidl, among others. She is at work on a doctorate in art history at Columbia University at the moment and holds an MSc in visual material and museum anthropology, and a BA in African Studies from Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming Eric Gyamfi and Oluremi C. Onabanjo. Come on in.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that really generous introduction. Hopefully Eric and I can live up to the kind words you've shared with us, and also just a quick thanks to Max for all of his hard work to coordinate this.
Without doubt.
It was really, would not have come together without.
And that's Max Fields, our associate curator, who will be coming on later to field questions. So I'm going to sign out now and let you all take it.
Wonderful. So I'll extend the most important thanks from me, which is to you, Eric, for the invitation to be in conversation and for your work. I think you know, how important it is and how it moves me continuously. So hopefully we can get into some good things. And I know you know I have a lot of questions and images and words to share. So hopefully we can start. But I guess maybe I start with the basic one, which is just how are you doing and how are you feeling? What is moving you right now?
Well, thank you so much, Remy, for agreeing to do this also with me. I think you've been really kind since we met in Bamako in 2017. And we have not had a proper opportunity to, speak at length. And I think it's lovely that this is one of such occasions to do so. So thank you again for agreeing to do this with me. I feel all right. There's just a few things happening in the country at the moment that's left me a little bit unsettled, but generally I feel just all right. How are you? How are you yourself?
Yeah, I'm all right as well. Similarly, I'm feeling discomforted by everything that we're working through, but grateful for work like yours that kind of brings us to what is important, right? Community, care, intimacy, relations. And so I thought maybe, we could start with the body of work that's on view in Houston right now and kind of precipitates our conversation, which is, just like us. So I know, you kind of have a sense, and for those who are joining us, I have a few images that will help orient the conversation and questions to kind of lead us through. But I'll start from the ground up like a good art historian and ask you to tell us, when did you start this series, and why was it important for you to do this work?
I think sometime in 2015, I volunteered to join a friend of mine who had been working within the human rights sector in the country for a while. I think he had set up an organization called the Solace Foundation. And at the time, they were interested in organizing workshops for queer persons, particularly those that resided in the countryside. And so the context for some of these workshops usually revolved around how to comport oneself within the society, how to navigate instances of abuse, how to carry oneself, and just things like this. I was a young graduate. I just finished with my undergraduate studies, and full of curiosity. And so I asked him one time to allow me to accompany him or them, because I think it wasn't just him, it was a number of people, to accompany them on one of their trips. And this person is in the name of Roberta Moafo, and I think currently he works for for Amnesty International as one of their persons. I'm not exactly sure what the position is, but So I followed him, and then my role was to just make some photographs that they could use for their documents and things like this. And I think I was fascinated from the first trip. For the first time, I was seeing queer persons from all walks of life, from all categories and all hierarchies, in a way that, to be honest, I had only seen in the movies, because up until that time, I wasn't entirely comfortable myself as a queer person. I was also finding my feet as a documentary photographer. I think I had done one major body of work, which properly grounded me within the genre. And so there was a lot of things that were new for me and also very, very fascinating. I remember very vividly an image of a woman selling what we call kebab,
Yeah.
or soya.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she putting down her keys to come into the room to attend the workshop and meeting with a lover afterwards. And it was nothing like I had seen in the movies. It was nothing like I had been presented in any book. It was so I don't want to say normal. There was just something beyond normal about it. It was just so basic. And then I thought, how come I haven't? How come I'm not accustomed to representations such as these? And so after that trip, I was convinced that I really wanted to make work that reflected some of these scenes that I had seen, some of these very unimpressive scenes, if I may, these very banal relationships and circumstances, and so I think that was a big that was a big that was a turning point in my decision to work on a project such as this. But of course, there's a lot of constraints. There's a lot of things that one had to move around, and it took me a bit of time to properly wrap my head around going ahead with the project.
Yeah, you get the sense of balance with the images to me. I think what you talk about, like the banal or the kind of baseline things, yeah, it's a sense of like not sensationalizing those you're working with and thinking with, but also a sense of affirming like what is glamorous, what is beautiful, what is present. And I thought, yeah, maybe we can go to this image and think about, I mean, for me, I love that you're a photographer's photographer in a certain way, because you're thinking about like the history of the medium, but also how it's like inflecting everyday scenes of life. And that is like everyday in the form of everyone who can be experiencing them. But I was curious, maybe you could tell a little bit more about, yeah, the stakes of the project for you, because it sounds like, right, it's coming at a turning point, but what did deciding to pursue that line of inquiry, both, you know, photographically, but also as a person in the world relating to social people mean?
I think when you're young, you're also stubborn. And well, I like to think I'm a particularly stubborn person. So when I have and so when my mind is lashed onto something that I have conviction about, I do not stop. And I think I was really convinced that documents like these were necessary, if not urgent, and if not to the broader social context, even to the history of photography, even looking at photography and what has been photographed and who has been photographed and who has been represented and by whom. I thought that in itself was worth pursuing. But beyond that, I also had a lot of friends a lot of people I felt comfortable around were and are also queer persons. And so I think it was important. There was very little way around it. It was important that this was done. And at the time, it hasn't been long. So when I say at the time, it sounds like 20 years ago. So just a few years ago. But still, there weren't many bodies of work that I had seen, but also particularly by, say, Ghanaians, because this is where I'm from, this is where I can speak to, particularly by Ghanaians that spoke directly to this. I had seen a few works around, and more broadly, the works of someone like Zanele Moholi is really hard to miss. But also on the quiet side, photographers like Nia Budai had also ventured into this subject matter, and I thought it would be interesting to contribute, to build on what all of these incredible photographers had been developing, and what they had been lending their voices to. And so all of these, there are motivations I can speak to, but I also imagine that there were so many other underlying motivations that perhaps are hard to think about now because we're on Zoom and there's 18 participants. And my mind has to, like take all of these into consideration if I'm being honest, but I'm sure there's more beyond that. But perhaps even the kind of music I had been listening to at the time, just things that are very unassuming could also instigate some of these things. But off the top of my head, these were the few pushes that drove me to work on this project.
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk also a little bit about your participants. You're talking about the friends, like the people you're living with. I'm curious. I mean, also, I think it reflects the specific trajectory that you situate yourself within, but what it means to call those that you're imaging participants rather than subjects, or subject matter. What was the to make an image like this, which to me is like super sensitive and intimate, like lighthearted, but capturing rhythms of production for the image and those who pose. It requires a kind of empathy on both sides that I'm wondering what the process was like.
So before I jump into the participant space, just a little story about this particular photograph. So this was the drag night, and it was, I think this was my second throughout, in my life up until that point. And something interesting happened. So I invited two of my street friends, a couple actually, to attend the event. And we had a hard time finding the location. And so we got to a certain main street, and then we were fumbling around because we also didn't want to ask where is the drag event happening because, one is not supposed to know. But then there were a bunch of men and some women sitting outside in what then looked like a bar. And immediately they saw us, they were like, "Oh, are you looking for that event?" And we were like, hesitantly, we were like, "Yes." And then they were like, "Oh, just go this way." And I think just that scene, thinking about it now, makes me think of what a contradiction exists when it comes to this subject matter in this country. Because on the one hand, there's like a strong resistance to it. But if one starts to look also, there are strong traces of just leave them alone, or this has always been with us, ness that exists. And so it's always, it's always a tricky space, you know, like when I hear it said that this is a homophobic country, just outrightly, it is. But at the same time, also there's pockets and traces of some levels of acceptance in certain corners or in certain places. And while I wish for more of those, I also do acknowledge their presence. But now circling back to the participant bit, I think I lifted it directly.
Yeah, but even before you even do, I just wanted to say I really appreciate that. There's a wonderful photographer who's American but now based in Europe. Their name is Sean D. Henry Smith, and they always insist on Black secrecy. And I feel like there's something of a queer secrecy here that's like these interstitial spaces where you can like have, right, love, care, consideration in spite of, in face of, right, an overarching homophobic master narrative or discourse. So I just thought that would be really interesting to think about. But yeah, please tell about this.
No, thank you for that. I think the participant bit, I had lifted directly from Zanele Moholi's project Phases and Phases, because at the time I thought that it fit very well into the kind of subject, quote unquote, that I was attempting to photograph. And this is because I started with my friends, and I started with people who were mostly within the activist circles. And so they became accomplices in a way. So it became, for me, less about, you know how in documentary terms or in photojournalistic terms, it is like a subject that's so far away over there and a photographer that's over here, you know, that moves over there to make images and moves back here, you know, to contextualize or to write about it. The first person I actually made photographs of for Just Like Us is my best friend, and it's a photograph of him and another good friend at the waterfall. And so these weren't people who were distant from me. And so it felt, or it seemed more appropriate to categorize them as participants as opposed to just subjects. But I also understand the complications of the term participants, and the ways in which it suggests that we share almost equally, because there's still a power dynamic when a camera is pointed at your face, whether you're the person's closest friend or not. And there's still a power dynamic when the image is framed 3 feet by 7 feet on a wall somewhere in Houston, or, you know, there's a lot more complications that arise with these treatments of a person's representation that makes me, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, I didn't think about all of these things at the time. But that makes me a bit more cautious when I think about some of these things now.
Yeah. I mean, I want to bring the next couple images into this dialogue, because I think the mindfulness you have around the power dynamic comes across not just the images, but into the captions and the text. And if you don't mind me quoting you to use for the benefit of everyone who's with us, I thought it would be really important to kind of share the caption that accompanies this image, which the two participants, right, those who are imaged, are Lily and Nana. And you say that the two met through a mutual friend, have been a couple since September 13, 2014. Lily moved out of her family home when she was 17 and has been living on her own since. She says, I try not to make friends. That way I can keep people away from my private life, as their questions and suspicions never get answered or confirmed. We keep a close circle of friends who are mostly just like us. It's not the best way to live, but it has worked for us thus far. And then the other image that I was just really taken with, as well as the caption that accompanies it, it's shorter. It says, Little Neve performs for Ivy and Rochelle. me as Ivy's son from her previous relationship. Although Ivy and Michelle are no longer together, they remain close friends. So, I mean, to me, this gets at the whole questions of different forms of family, community, right, kinship and relation, but also something about the care that you've given with the captions, the fact you incorporate their own voices directly as well, made me wonder what the process was of making the captions alongside the photographs. And then, of course, you know, with thinking about lineages, of course, with the presence of South Africa, I think about Santu Mofokeng, who insists on a photographer's right to write to accompany the image. And then on the other side, maybe like David Goldblatt, who's like super in the documentary tradition and writes like almost little novels with each image that he produces. Yeah, so just, I think some comments on text and image.
I think to start off, I think the ways in which I accompanied the images with some of these extended captions, I think goes on to affirm for me my suspicion with just the documentary image and how easy it is perhaps to manipulate an image if one knows how, or if one knows how to construct. And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's something to be aware of and to use to one's advantage. And I think if I look back to photography, for instance, you see traces of this. You see how the documentary image has been used to spread a certain idea about a certain group of people, or about a certain place, or about a certain kind of face or nose or forehead or whatever. You know, it's had its place, and I didn't know this at the time, but I knew that I like, when I say I didn't know this at the time, I wasn't maybe acutely aware of how I am explaining some of these things now. But I think at the same time, I understood that for the images to have a certain weight, that they needed to be accompanied by almost like a pulling behind the curtain. If the image was like a room or something, pulling behind the curtain to actually get a glimpse of, you know, what is actually working in the back, you know, like how things are moving. And I'm really happy you mentioned Santu Mofokeng and David Goldblatt, rest their souls. I think they also emphasize on this. They emphasize on writing. They emphasize on much more beyond just the image. And even though that had not been at the fore of my thinking or brain when I was making these images, they must have been in my recesses somewhere because I did channel them.
Yeah. I mean, I love when I hear photographers talk about things that they feel, because there's always, you know, especially ones who work within the documentary tradition, or I think especially with you, because you're skeptical of the documents, and I really like that too. But there's a sense that, you know, this is not just about precision and a right or a claim to veracity, but also you're anticipating yourself, and that's really, quite exciting, even if it's like, right, to look back at those or feel the approaches of those who have come before you. But I think, before we even get into like the question of you know, the stakes of the document and how we're critical of it, I wanted to just talk a little bit about I guess, the conversations, whether you see this project as something open-ended or something that, you know, held a particular moment, and what you see for the project.
I think there's a few things that I think about these days, Before that, I was going to ask if you had any comments yourself, or if you could give a little bit more insight into this relationship between images and text, or like images and writing, as practiced by photographers, perhaps everywhere in the world, like what your general thoughts are on accompanying images or photographs with text. Because they say the photograph is already 1,000 words, but it's shady to accompany it with more words. So I would just love to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think
yeah.
for me, I appreciate that question. I think especially as somebody who's not a photographer, but spends a lot of their life thinking about how photographs operate in space, whether it's from a curatorial perspective or in the archive, in relation to critical and scholarly production on the page, you know, as critic and art historian. But I think that, you know, maybe I'll make a plug for the the allure of the photo book for me. That's felt like a really central and important part of my practice, both as just a mode of research and interest, but also as like an insistence on materiality in some ways. And especially in the pandemic era, it's been something that I have, returned to as a kind of solve for the moments where I wish I could, you know, share space or be in an exhibition. The photo book has been really comforting because there's a way that you encounter the photographer's voice, you know, through like the building up of a sequence. That's a kind of narrative to me. And what they choose to say and not say, what they choose to show and not show, I feel like those are some really exciting moves as a reader to witness. And yeah, so I think for example, someone who I really enjoyed their monographs, Liz Johnson Arthur, and there's only like one line.
Oh yeah.
And right, looking at the hunger image, and I'm like, wow.
Right.
I read like 5,000 words every day, and it's just kind of blew my head off.
I really love it. I really do.
Yeah.
But such an active photographer also, with her medium format, just like scurrying around. Exactly. Very sharp eye, very sharp brain. I really do love her. I really do admire her work as well. Met her in Bamako just 2019.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. That's really good.
We had a few good times. You know, just
this is community. Right? And I think, for me, particularly this image is kind of a wonderful one because like it kind of echoed to me for how you're thinking about like, you know, photography or like video making on the camera phone, but also like the materiality, the insistence on the print.
Right.
Like, constructing communities. There's something that like Paul Gilroy talks about where it's like, how do visual cultures nurture community? And I feel like photography is the perfect example for how like the sharing allows us to kind of have some love. But I think, in terms of literally thinking about like the social life of your project, these are installation images from the public show in Houston, but also the show has, this series has been shown in Ghana, right in Accra, but it's also a constellation has been shown at the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg. I mean, the first image I showed here was featured in the spreads for Aperture's Platform Africa issue. I'm curious about, the resonance of the transnational for me is really palpable here, but it also is, it's still a project about the quiet side of queer life in Ghana. So what has that meant for you in thinking about the circulation of the work?
Right. So I'll try to answer the very first question about the project being a continuous investigation, or being is investigation the right word? About the project being continuous or being closed. I think I very much leave it open. But I think of other forms. I think of other ways. How else could I perhaps extend the project? Could I teach other people to to make photographs, for instance, could I teach younger queer people to work in the darkroom? Could I rework existing photographs? Could I, there seems to be so many directions that a project like this could take. And I think I'm interested more these days in thinking about the times and what seems relevant, but also what seems efficient, and for what purposes. And so that's been on my mind a lot, actually. And with regards to the project, the transnational bit, I think I very much started off thinking about a local audience, and so that affected how I photograph, how I chose to photograph, how long I stayed with people, and what it is I was looking for. And right from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to make very unimpressive images. I wanted to make images that were so boring that there would be nothing extraordinary to look out for. I wanted everyday scenes, and that meant that I had to live with a lot of the people I photographed, because I also understood that it wasn't something that could be easily fabricated. And some of the images show this well, some of them don't. But at the end of it, I'm also glad for the experience that is not shown in the photograph, which is living with people and getting to understand different aspects of queer life, which I wouldn't necessarily read in a book easily or watch on TV in a way that I experienced it. And so it's all good for me. When the project was done, one of the first places it was shown was in Cape Coast, and it's shown in Ghana at several different places, several different times. And I think the thing about works like this is it speaks to a broader conversation. It speaks to a broader phenomenon that I cannot box it. And it would be disingenuous to also think that I would do a project like this and it wouldn't travel. But my primary focus, which is what affected how I photographed, where I went to photograph, who I photographed, and the entire process that surrounds it, was informed by a local audience or a local dissemination or a local focus. And so everything else is a plus or became a plus, if I may. But I also understood that there would be everything else. I wasn't, yeah.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I may push back a little bit on you saying that they're boring images, because they're not to me. They might be embracing like an ethos of the banal or like the everyday, but they are still really captivating. And I think that's something that, yeah, kind of ties into why they can live in Houston, right? And people still resonate or have something that pulls them towards the images. And then, of course, as promised, I want to talk about your skepticism towards the document and kind of exploding or expanding the tradition in a way. But yeah, so of course, I have this set of 2 images and installation, right, that was from your 2017 project. But then I also have here spreads. So it's a similar iteration of the same project, but it's playing on, right, I don't know, questions of intimacy, like, you know, the scope of relation, but also how the document, like the photograph, has clarified specific narrative, a question of a set of, I don't know, relations perhaps. But I was hoping, yeah, you could talk about this project as it existed, both, you know, on the page, but also in the installation space. So not as neat image.
Right. So I think this is when this project is probably came at the point where I was getting comfortable in my rebellion towards the documentary. I was gradually cementing it. So I developed a body of work within a period of a year. I think sometime in February 2017, February 2017, through to November. And these images were meant to be a kind of a record of my leaving home and like moving through friends and acquaintances and just trying to find ground after leaving the comfort of a home where I had been for the longest time in my life. So that was the intention. That was what I set out to do. So they were very documentary images, if one may, just documenting movement and spaces and friends and beds and just places I would be generally. And when it was time to put the work together, I started making some decisions like chopping sometimes a third of the image off and throwing it away, and like attempting to print some of the images on different types of stationery, everyday paper to see what other effect that they brought. And I realized that these little gestures conveniently took what was otherwise purely documentary images and sent them elsewhere. As to where, I'm not sure, but it took them. Right. It did take them somewhere. And I think this became a good starting point for me, or it gave me the confidence to begin to look beyond the documentary while still looking very much into the documentary form, and in a way attempting to develop a certain language for myself. And here again, text also comes into the images, but here the texts are actually from the spaces where I made the photographs. And so sometimes they would come directly from the space. Sometimes they would come mediated through a TV or a radio or something, and I would attempt to pick a line also arbitrarily and join them with the images and see how they worked. And I think very interesting things developed, and I carried forward some of these developments into my later work and thinking around photography in general.
Amazing. I could ask you questions till the cows come home, and there are so many more things we could talk about, but I've been told that I have to share you with those who are also here. So I think Max is going to help us, with questions that are from the audience.
Yeah, thank you both again so much for this really wonderful conversation. And thank you to the folks who have submitted questions for Eric and Oluremi. If anybody in the audience has an additional question to submit, please go ahead and enter it in the chat if you're on Zoom, or in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. We have two really interesting questions, one from David Ballard and one from Omuyeni Clement. And they're both asking, they're both addressed to you, Eric, and they're asking about your relationship with the participants, with the people that you photograph for these works. And David's asking about how you develop that relationship, if you already have an existing relationship with the people that you photograph, and how you speak to them in order to build trust. And then Omuyeni is asking about a lack of I don't know how to say this word very well. Anonymity. Can you? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I hate that word so much.
Anonymity.
Thank you.
Anonymity.
Yes. But the question is essentially to say, you know, what happens when these images of queer folks go out into the world? You know, what happens to those people when they lose their sort of essentially their closeted identity? You know, they're sort of outed through these images in a way to a larger public.
Right, right. So the first question has to do with trust. Um, for the project, I never really went out of my way to speak with or to photograph people that I didn't know. I basically worked through my network of existing friends, and through those other connections developed. And so I'm not sure what the term is, but it happened quite organically. And so one instance will lead to another. I would follow a friend to say a funeral, and I'll meet another friend of a friend, and then we would speak. And then I would speak to them about this project I'm doing. Then they would be like, "Oh, you should come around, or you should come stay with us, or you should, you know." So it kind of happened in that way. I never met a stranger between whom I didn't have a mutual friend or acquaintance or whatever, and asked outrightly to photograph them to use for my project. And I think one of the precautions that I took at the time, which is still or was still not safe proof, was photographing primarily people who were out in their communities to a large extent, or people who were within the activist circles who, to a large extent, also had their image out to an extent. And so that brings it down a notch, but it still doesn't guarantee safety for these persons. And so within the photograph themselves also, I made certain decisions, like shooting in black and white wasn't arbitrary. It also it also lent itself to a little bit of ambiguity. And I remember when the works were shown at the Nobuke Foundation in Accra for the first time, a few people were like, "It's this, what time is this?" Like, when are we looking at? And so those were also, it was an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. And I think those two things can exist and work themselves out. Sometimes also I worked with lighting, and I was very certain I didn't want to obscure anyone's face. I was very certain I didn't want to photograph people from their backs, because those were the images that mostly existed when images of queer persons were searched or looked for, particularly from these parts. And I thought those kinds of images perpetuated this thing of darkness, or something that's obscure, something that's unknown, something that's possibly dangerous. And right from the beginning, I knew I wanted to stay away from those kinds of images. But I also didn't want to go for images that revealed people so outrightly. And so in other instances also, I would photograph large groups of people where people that I knew would be present, but then it would be hard to say this is the person or that is the person, because it's a street, or it's a dance floor, or it's a group situation, it's a festival, and everyone could be present. You know what I mean? So just decisions like that. But again, working as a young photographer, there's so many mistakes that one makes. One doesn't get it right entirely. And I think if I am to go back to start this project afresh, which is not possible, I would perhaps train different kinds of photographers or different kinds of persons to bring different kinds of voices and approaches and comfort to something like this, I don't think it's a single person's undertaking. I think this is something that needs to be done communally, and you'd be surprised very terrible images or memes could end up being more potent or being more functional than a properly crafted, like properly investigated, structured image. And so I think about all of these other possibilities and routes that a project like this could take.
May I interject something? I'm such a fan of your work, Eric, and I was so pleased when Mark Seeley included it in Cosmologies. But you're extremely thoughtful and extremely humble, I think, about your images. And as Remy was saying, I don't find them banal. I find perhaps you're documenting the everyday, but far from banal. And I think sometimes this kind of work could be confrontational, or it could emit pathos. But I think your work encourages empathy. And I may be biased as a queer person also, but I find that then your concept of care for the subject in the community, I don't know, somehow it comes through the images for me. I really get a sense of it.
No, thank you, Steve. I think perhaps a bit of it was also in the awareness that I was also making images that represented me. And God knows I love beautiful things. Yeah.
Yeah. I also have a question that's inspired in part by Remy's first question, how are you? And also that book that's behind Remy right now, Undoing Imperialism by Ariella Azoulay. It's a question that I've been asking artists that I've been doing studio visits with or talking to over Zoom. And I think it would be interesting to ask you, especially because I'll tell you the question and then I'll say why I'm asking it. The question is, as an artist working in 2020 and now through 2021, how do you deal with the relationship between, or reckon with the relationship between pessimism and potentiality when making work? Because it's a very difficult time to think, to create, and just to be in general. And I'm asking this question because your work the aesthetics of your work, while they're, toned in monochrome, they're black and white, and they're quite, I would say they're still, they're not anti-hope. They're really joyful in a way, and in a serene way. So I'm curious, to ask you that question, knowing that your work doesn't sort of express itself through a sort of a pessimistic aesthetic, a dark aesthetic, right? Or I shouldn't say dark aesthetic, but more like a tired or yeah.
Right. Thank you, Max. I'm going to think about that for just a good few seconds. Maybe, or perhaps I could start from the work and my decision to go with the kind of the decision to make images of joy, if one may, primarily, even though that's not entirely the picture, is a few things, or can be based off of a few things. And I think one of those is that even though I've been sitting here talking about my rebellion against the documentary form, I also understand that it's one that is accessible. It's one that people readily identify with. And so I understand that positioning, and I use it to my advantage readily without shame. And that's exactly what I did with these images. I understood very well the kind of images that existed about queer people. And I know that this is not all queer life in Ghana. This is not a fraction of queer life in Ghana. It's way beyond this. There's so much more that happens. There is violence. And the fact that I choose to work in this way, it's not to erase the fact that it's not to erase the fact that there is violence, but that I am in a position to choose what to highlight and to choose what these images can instigate. And that's exactly what I did. To move beyond the fact that there is violence, but to also believe that images can instigate something, and to go ahead to make images that could bring the results or the kind of results that I imagined they would. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, you definitely did.
Yeah.
Making me a bit emotional here. We have, do we have time for one more question? Because we have one from an audience member.
Sure.
Okay.
I mean,
this is from Diago Santos Bento, and they ask, "Hi Eric, how do you understand your practice and your work in relation to a possibility of activism towards a safer, perhaps more welcoming, empowering space for the queer community, both in Ghana and Africa in general, and specifically now taking into consideration the very recent events in Ghana?"
So here's the thing. I really believe in the power of photography. I believe in the power of images. But at certain points, photographers have to put their cameras down and become writers or go to the street or, take on other roles. And I think when you come back to photography, it makes you a better photographer because you understand even more the nuances of what it is that you're trying to photograph or what it is you're trying to understand yourself. And so I think what is happening in Ghana now is unfortunate, but it is perhaps an important time to also work through and to find different modes of working, different approaches that would perhaps be more relevant to this current struggle, like what's happening now. Perhaps these images may have played their part or their role, or they would play another role in some time to come, or they may still be playing a certain kind of role now, who knows? But I think it's still important to look very closely at what is happening and to devise the most appropriate, the most consequential, I don't want to say solution, but approaches, for instance, to dealing with it. And if it means putting the camera down and assuming other roles, then absolutely. But if it also means doing all of them alongside, if it's possible or permissible, then absolutely. I don't think I think about hard and fast rules about how anything, be it photography or activism or I think that they're all interwoven, or they all, I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, but I think that I personally leave room to become other things at specific times, depending on what is required. And so I push for same. And one doesn't have to be an activist to take to the street or to support a cause or to, yeah.
Eric, for those of us in the United States, if you're not specifically looking for news about Ghana, really what you're hearing right now is all about the COVAX vaccines. You're not hearing about internal strife. You're not hearing about the LGBTQI controversy. Can you tell us the context that you're speaking about in terms of what's going on in Ghana right now?
So please do check out the LGBTQ Ghana Instagram page. There is a lot of information on the page. It's updated regularly with the happenings in the country. There is also a fundraiser that you can contribute to support people who are at the front lines, people who have put everything on the line to activate for this. And I think they need your support the most. And so I will encourage you to show some love, either by simply liking the page, by following, by contributing your voice, or by donating to the cause, which is very important. So LGBTQ Ghana Instagram page, I think I would send a link right now.
I've put the link for the GoFundMe in the chat for everyone. So
right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for contributing, Remy.
Of course. Without a doubt. No, for sure.
And Remy, Eric, any closing questions or comments? As we've gone over, but I think it's been well worthwhile.
Just gratitude. Thank you all for the space, and Eric for your work. Really appreciate it. It's wonderful in times like these to be reminded of work that moves us and will continue to move us in all the ways, that are possible. And I really appreciate it. What you'd said, Eric, about what it means to put when it's useful to put down the camera and how it serves you when you come back. That's important for all of us.
Well, thank you so much, Remy, for also being so gracious, both to me, but to this panel and audience also, for your really thoughtful questions, because those answers could not have come out from just anywhere. And so I really appreciate your drawing out all of these things from me, and for just sharing this really beautiful moment. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Max and Steve, for also hosting us, for allowing this to be possible. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad we did it. I want to thank you both, Remy, Eric, for sharing your intellect and your work and your thoughts about it. It's been a great evening event. And I also want to thank Max Fields, Associate Curator at FotoFest, who's put these talks together and was working for a long time to get you both together. So I'm really happy that it happened. And our behind the scenes colleague, Sarah Ansel, who's helped us with some tech items for the talk, and to thank the audience for coming in and for participating. And please do check out the FotoFest website and the FotoFest YouTube page where these talks are archived, but also this Instagram link that Remy put up. I encourage you all to learn more about that and get involved. So thank you so much.
Quickly, I just want to say a thank you to the Magnum Foundation for helping us spread the word about this event.
Oh, yes.
And also for some of our viewers, you can find Eric Gyamfi's work on the Magnum Foundation website. And then I also should say that Oluremi has an incredibly well updated website. And on there, you can find a lot of her writing on many of the artists that she mentioned today, including Santa Moho King and Zanema Holly and others. So I definitely recommend checking that out. It's an incredible resource.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Ciao.